We're back, everyone, with a trip down memory lane to the cell. You know, if they let you graduate high school and you don't know that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, I don't know. They shouldn't have done that. That's like the most important thing that you need to learn in high school, isn't it? Not like taxes or life skills or basic math. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Anyway, hi, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about the cell. We're going to talk about some major organelles and their functions, and really the basic ones you should know. To be honest, the cell is so complex and amazing that people are still studying it now to figure out how do these certain processes happen. And if you really dove deep into the cell and just took a cell bio course, you would be amazed at how wonderful and complex the whole cell is. So here's a basic rundown of a cell. You should be able to look at a blank cell and have an idea of what most of the major organelles are, and then from that know organelle functions. So we're going to go through some of these. I've got a pro tip for you. For example, a lot of these it's easy to remember just by looking at their shape or location. Here's my life pro tip that I wish someone had told me when I was when I was in high school. I wish they would have told me. A lot of times I've seen students mix up the ER and the Golgi body. Well, look at them. They look alike. Here it's blue and here this one's purple, but they're kind of like this, like a squished grape or a squished tomato that was cut in half or something. Well, how can I tell which one's which? Sometimes the ER will have ribosomes on it, but sometimes it'll just be around. How could I remember? Nucleus and the ER, they're like BFFs. They're actually like kind of stuck together at some point. They don't go, you know, those people who don't see one without the other. That's this. Well, the Golgi, he's like the mailman of the cell. He's off on his own. He is not connected to the nucleus. So a lot of times you'll see Golgi farther away from the nucleus. This isn't a good picture to illustrate that. In other pictures I'll show you. But just leaving this up here so you guys can take in the cell, see if you remember some of these. Feel free to pause and look and see if you remember any of these and remember any of those functions are. In fact, I super recommend that. Pause the video, look at the cell, look at the names of these different organelles or little organs that are inside of your cells, and see if you can remember what their jobs are just by their name. Any ones that you can, great, check them off. Just say, hey, okay, I got this. I know what I'm doing. And any ones you don't, be like, that's maybe where I need to pay special attention. I've got to try to make an effort to remember those. All right. So feel free to pause. Maybe you already did. So I'm going to move on and we'll talk about the major organelles and their functions and the ones you should know for our purposes. So the cell membrane is important. It's going to come up in one of these videos soon about how we balance and maintain homeostasis inside of our bodies. Every cell is surrounded by a cell membrane, and the cell membrane separates it from whatever's outside the cell and the neighboring cells. We say the cell membrane is made up of phospholipids, so those little, remember in the lipid video? They've got a little circly head and two little tails. It's a phospholipid bilayer, so the tails face each other and the heads are on the outside facing in and out of the cell. And then there's proteins that are stuck inside the cell membrane that allow certain things to come in and out, kind of like a door. I like to think of the proteins as the door, and the phospholipids are kind of like a screen that stuff really can't get in. Maybe air, but nothing else can really get in. It is so much more complex than that. I remember asking someone at some point, well, if our skin's made of cells, well, how do they stick together? Why don't we just fall apart? And then I had like a crisis for a moment. But there's little bits on the outside of our cells that act almost like hooks that help cells stick together. There's little flags or markers on the outside that say, this is a Mrs. Huff cell. This is a Huff cell. Don't let anyone else in. That's not a Huff cell. We need to kill that, whatever that is. So the cell membrane is involved in signaling other cells accepting information from outside the cell, delivering things, maintaining the transport of molecules in and out of the cell. It's a very complex, incredibly amazing organelle. For us, we just need to know it's like the doorway and the bouncer. It decides who comes in and out. Here's a great picture. This shows it's a little bit more complex than maybe what you originally have thought. Here are our phospholipids forming that bi or double layer. Here are the proteins that act like the door for things to come in and out. They can also act as little rafts or signals, because this membrane is like a bubble. Think of the skin of a bubble. It's not just like sitting there like a ball. It's moving, and these little proteins can move on top of, on the bottom of, and through these to send signals. These little glycolipids and glycoproteins and these little bits here, glyco is for carb, so it's like a carb attached to a lipid or a carb attached to a protein. They can signal or hook into other cells. And the cytoskeleton, which is what gives cells their various shape, is hooked into here too. And that's why the cell can kind of maintain a shape. Like if you're in your mind, you picture a red blood cell, you picture kind of like a donut-shaped thing. Or if you picture a nerve cell, maybe you're picturing like a splat with a long tail. Well, it maintains that shape through this cytoskeleton. The cytoplasm's the goo, the liquid inside the cell. And that's where these life functions, those chemical reactions take place. So all those biomolecules we talked about are here floating in this cytoplasm, getting broken down, getting built up, smashing into other stuff where they need to go, and being delivered to different parts of the cell so the cell can function. All the chemical reactions that are keeping you alive right now are happening there. And organisms that you can find in there, centrioles, they're involved in cell division. We'll talk about them. The ER, that's involved in transport and making fats, sometimes making proteins. Mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, which, what does that mean? It means it makes energy. It makes ATP energy for the cell. The Golgi, he's like the little mailman of the cell. He helps package whatever gets made and deliver it. Peroxisomes, we're not going to focus on those. Don't worry about those. Lysosomes, they break things down, and the cytoskeleton sort of gives it like a function, like a functional shape. And then pop a nucleus. You probably remember that one. You're like, oh yeah, the nucleus, that's like the important one, right? People say it's like the brain of the cell. It's the most important organelle because it has the DNA. And DNA and protein are sort of arranged inside of the nucleus in this stuff called chromatin. Maybe you remember, like, didn't she say something about a chromosome? I feel like I've heard that. Did she say that in the nucleic acid video? I don't know what that is. Okay. I wish I had it with me. I'm not at my house, so I don't have all my yarn with me. A chromosome is like a nice ball of yarn. Really easy to pick up, carry. I can see where the end of my yarn is. Nice. Chromatin would be like after my cat or any of my children touch my yarn and it's in a big disaster area. Or you can think of also Christmas lights. Maybe you're more familiar with than yarn. Once you get them in the package, they're nice and neat and all arranged, all flat and everything. It's easy to pull them out, put them up on the window or wherever you want to put them. Then when you take them down, usually someone doesn't put them away right and they end up in this jumbled ball, kind of like my cord for my mouse. This jumbled mess, that's chromatin. So it's kind of a jumbled, loose mess of DNA and protein. What matters between that and chromosomes? Well, the DNA will kind of wind itself up into a chromosome when it's ready to divide and become two new cells. But otherwise it's in chromatin. Why? Well, imagine my tight ball of yarn. Maybe I need some yarn that's in the middle. Maybe I need the code that's in the middle of the ball. That's not really easy to get. So if it's in this loose mess, I can pick out code from almost anywhere, as opposed to it being tightly wound up. Inside the nucleus, my head's in the way, sorry. Inside the nucleus is the nucleolus. That's the nucleus's little friend. So like if you have someone in charge in their office, maybe their office is the nucleus, and the person in the office is the nucleolus. Well, the nucleolus makes ribosomes, so it spits out a bunch of ribosomes, and they'll hang out with the ER, or they'll just be floating around in the cytoplasm. And the nucleolus contains proteins, and then the proteins are made by the ribosomes. Ribosomes are important because they're the protein factory. Here are some functions of other organelles, but really the important ones that we need to know, to be honest with you: nucleus, cell membrane, ribosome, mitochondria. Those are like some really, really, really important ones you should know. The ER is involved in transport. This is what somebody told me forever ago. It helped me remember. Maybe it'll help you. The endoplasmic reticulum, usually we just call it the ER. Someone's like, okay, well, in the ER, if you're going to have to go to the ER, someone has to take you there on the highway. They have to transport you there. So the ER is like the transport, the highway. I know, but you know what? I remembered it for many years. I'm not going to tell you how many because it's embarrassing, but I've remembered it for that many years, so maybe it will help you too. It's also involved in synthesis. That means making of things like lipids and in some case proteins. Ribosomes are where proteins are made, and proteins are made with RNA. So that's like the code. Ribosome is the factory where the code gets sent to, the instructions. Like, here you go, this is what you're going to build, and the ribosome then builds the protein. Mitochondria makes energy, and the energy, we don't produce light energy, we produce ATP energy. That's the energy that we use to power us, that I'm using right now to talk to you and think about things. The Golgi body, often now called the Golgi apparatus, they sometimes will make carbs or put some things together and make carbs, but I think of them as like the post office, right? They're going to package things up and to secrete them or send them out. So they package things up in a certain way and it gets sent off to be used somewhere else in the cell, or depending on how they package it, it gets sent off outside the cell. And then the cytoskeleton is the framework that helps, like, gives the cell its shape. It's not just a blob of anything. A lot of them have a recognizable shape, and that's from the cytoskeleton. So here is a much more detailed picture of our cell. It's still, surprisingly, it's still very generalized and we would have to have a movie to show you really what it's like inside the cell. And it's not just full of empty space. There's stuff going on all the time, stuff we can't see. Here's our nucleus. Everything in here, all this purple stuff, is your DNA. It's in chromatin. It's like a big mess, basically, right there. Here's the nucleolus, making those little ribosomes that get spit out through these little openings, these little pores in the nucleus. So this big purple jawbreaker here is our whole nucleus, surrounded by and connected with its best friend, the ER. So the blue thing connected to the nucleus is the ER in this case. Transporting materials, ribosomes are on it, so maybe some proteins will get made and moved through this little highway system. Here, this little jelly bean looking guy, that's our mitochondria. It's making energy. I could talk to you a ton about the mitochondria. We just don't have time. Lysosomes break things down in the cell. They're kind of like the digestive system. Here we have our Golgi body, our Golgi apparatus. It's kind of bubbling and moving, and it creates these little vesicles. A vesicle is like a little bubble, and the bubble will go and send whatever's in here to different parts of the cell or out of the cell. It's being sent out through exocytosis. It's being popped out of the cell. Oh, difference between rough and smooth ER, by the way. Rough has ribosomes on it. Smooth does not. And then, let's see. Oh, yeah, our centrioles and our centrosomes. A lot of people have told me they look like pasta, like if you have like noodles, uncooked noodles together. This is attached to like the cytoskeleton, and it makes these little spindle fibers here. They're involved in pulling the cell apart during cell division. So when we talk about that, this guy is going to come up again. So here's what I want you to do. Pause the video. See if you can label these major things inside the cell. Take a minute to actually pause it. Look for yourself. Can I label these things? Do I know what they are? What's the difference between this and this, and would that actually be on a quiz, both of those labeled because they look exactly the same? No, but I'll tell you. So take a moment for yourself. See if you remember and could label all of the things that are in here. If you could, you're great. Oh, we didn't talk about these, but I will after you pause the video. Did you pause the video? I hope you did. Like, actually do it and see if you know these instead of just waiting for me to tell you the answer. So let's look. We'll go over all these parts. Nucleolus, that makes the ribosomes. This one's pointing to the chromatin that's in here. It looks like wavy lines. This here is pointing to our nucleus. Here we have our smooth ER. Here we have our Golgi body, or our Golgi apparatus. Here this is pointing to our cell membrane. These are our centrioles. Here this goo inside the cell is our cytoplasm. This is a vesicle, a bubble that's being sent out from the Golgi to somewhere else. These little dots here are ribosomes, the protein factory. The jelly bean is our mitochondria. Now what about these pink and yellow ones? Well, I wouldn't do that to you guys. The pink ones could be a vacuole. Vacuoles store things like water and nutrients inside of a cell. They're incredibly large in a plant cell, but we're not talking about plants, we're talking about people. This could be a lysosome used to digest things. I wouldn't do that. I would only have you label some major ones that you really can tell in the picture what they are. And then the outside of the cell, some cells move, including cells in our body. What? And so the organelles for movement are called cilia, which are little hair-like structures, or flagella. They're the whip-like tail. Let me just take a moment and help you understand. The only cells that have flagella are sperm cells, so some of us don't make those. Cilia, everybody actually has cilia and ciliated cells. They line your respiratory system. So on the inside of your like nasal passages and down your bronchioles, as you head into your lungs, the cells are ciliated. Well, why would they have cilia on them? The cilia act like brushes to collect and move away any dust or junk that you've collected but from breathing. If you have like a uterus and fallopian tubes, your fallopian tubes have these cilia on them. What are they used for? To brush the egg down to the uterus. So our bodies do have ciliated cells. Only some people have. If you make sperm cells, then you have cells with flagella. So hopefully that helps you understand the basic things about the cell. Oh yeah, spoiler for our next video. So hopefully that helps you understand the basic part of our cells and the basic organelles that you need to know, and that you need to maybe label some on a blank cell like this. If you could do that and tell me what the functions of things like nucleus, mitochondria, Golgi, ER, centrioles, chromatin, nucleolus. If you could do that, you're great. If you could tell me the functions of those, and label them, you're great. You know everything you need to know with the cell. I hope that helps, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.